And joining us from Washington is Clay Lowery, a former U.S. Assistant Treasury Secretary for International Affairs from the years 2005 to 2009, which coincidentally was a period when China actually ended its peg to the U.S. dollar. Now, Clay is currently the managing director of Clover Park Group, and he joins us from our D.C. bureau. Okay, Clay, so we're talking about deja vu of 2007 all over again. Now, you don't think that China should be labeled a currency manipulator because it doesn't really, in the end, help the U.S.?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Susan, for having me on with your show. It's hard to say that they are a manipulator because it basically implies that we can figure out the intent of what they are doing. I agree with what Paul's point is. There is no question that they manage their currency, as do many countries around the world. So the question is then, are they manipulating their currency for a specific gain? And I'm not necessarily convinced that that is the case. But at the same time, a lot of people, a lot of economists believe that it is undervalued currency, and it probably is. And so it's not in equilibrium, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it is being manipulated. And then secondly, to the kind of more directly to your question, what is it that we actually, what is the objective we get by saying you are a manipulator? And that's the part that I still haven't figured out from all the different back and forth on this question.
Well, Clay, you don't seem convinced that China may actually gains from this managed currency. But, you know, the person leading this charge on Capitol Hill is Senator Schumer. He's always been leading this charge, in fact, even back in 2007. Yeah. And he says China's currency policy has been even more damaging than you think. Take a listen here.
China's currency manipulation helped bring about this global recession, and now its continued manipulation is hampering the recovery. It's a double whammy.
So the whole financial crisis blamed on China's currency policy, the yuan. You got to be kidding me here, right? What do you think, Clay?
Well, I don't want to overstate that. I mean, I think that he said it's one of the issues. So I don't want to say that he blamed the whole thing on China's currency policy. He obviously is blaming part of it. There is a discussion out there as to whether global financial imbalances, which includes China's currency, it also includes, by the way, the lack of savings in the United States, is one of the causes of the crisis. I think that there probably is some element of that, but it's very hard to say that it was China's management of its currency that created the crisis that we see. And in fact, actually, the period from 2005 to 2008, we saw about roughly a 20% appreciation of the yuan. So there was at least some flexibility. Don't get me wrong, it was probably not as much as Chuck Schumer would like, or frankly, even I would like. But at the same time, it's a little hard to blame them for the financial crisis that we are still trying to come out of.
Clay, Paul Gordon here. Chuck Schumer also specifically called China a mercantilist nation. He said, I believe China is a mercantilist nation. Now, that's a pretty serious challenge for many reasons, but one of which is that this is a failed an economic theory that basically failed in the late 18th century. If he's right, this is all going to blow up in China's face. Do you think China is mercantilist?
Again, it's kind of like, I'm just not into the labeling game. I mean, the idea that we're going to beat our chests and say you're a manipulator or you're a mercantilist is a little bit, strange. I mean, it seems to me that what we want to do is have U.S.-China economic and financial relations on a very even keel. And that means you have to be tough in your diplomacy, but you don't have to be necessarily naming countries for things that probably you're not exactly sure what they've done. And so, so it's a little hard for me to say that they're mercantilist.
No, absolutely. Okay, don't worry about the label so much, but is China pursuing an economic policy that will blow up in his face? I mean, is the level of the yuan going against their long-term economic benefit?
Well, that I do think is probably correct. I mean, I actually think that, and you're starting to see this, I mean, one of the problems of keeping your currency stable, I mean, potentially artificially stable, is that it could actually lead towards inflationary issues. And that's one of the things that you're starting to see in China, is inflation is picking up, and they don't have the adjustment mechanism that you have with a more flexible currency to deal with that. And so I think that that is something that the Chinese have to deal with. I actually think the point that you and Susan were talking about earlier is even a more important point, which is China's got to work on its social safety net and also on having a more competitive financial market so that you basically, if you are a China saver, you don't put your money in a mattress or you don't put it into like some speculative equity investment, but you actually are able to put it into banks, into bonds, into other financial instruments, and that you have a social safety net so that you don't have to be constantly saving for that rainy day because the government doesn't have anything that can back you up.
Yeah. Hey, let me ask you something, Clay, because you worked as a chief of staff for now Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner at one point. So let me just ask you, what about this pressure right now on Geithner's shoulders? You have 130 lawmakers basically signing a letter saying you have to label China a currency manipulator. He's come out saying that China will eventually move at this point. But, you know, didn't Tim Geithner in the past actually call China a currency manipulator? He backed off that pretty quickly. What do you think his thinking is right here?
Well, I don't want to, I mean, I have not spoken to Secretary Geithner about these issues, so I don't want to comment on, I can't say what he would think. I can say this. Look, of course he's under a lot of pressure. By the way, he's under a lot of pressure on a lot of issues. And it seems to me that we are in a state where we've kind of started to get some financial stability back in our country, and we need to start restoring economic growth on a more sustainable path. Part of that, by the way, is going to be having a sound international policy, including dealing with China. My own view is that that does not include calling someone a manipulator. It basically talks about having good strategic dialogue with them, like Hank Paulson had done. And I think Secretary Geithner probably gets that, but he is under pressure. You're correct.
Okay. Clay, nice talking to you today. Thank you for joining us. Clay Lowery, Managing Director at Glover Park Group.